Hi guys, this is Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. This is the editing program that I use for most of my images. Sometimes I take my images into the full Photoshop if I need to do a bit more extensive editing, but for 99% of my client photos I use this program called Lightroom, and it's so easy to use. I just wanted to show you a little bit about how to edit a photo in here and a bit of a before and after. So this is the maternity image that we're going to use. This is the beautiful Tamara that I shot a couple of weeks ago. She's 32 weeks pregnant. This is the original straight out of camera photo. I haven't done any adjustments to this at all yet. So this is the original, and then we're going to take it to this. So I deliberately underexposed her skin because I wanted to keep all of that pretty colour in the sky and to keep the detail in the sky. The sky was my main aim here, because if I have brought up the exposure on her, then the sky just would have blown out to white. So I don't tend to underexpose a lot, but if I really want something like this, then I will underexpose it, because I know that I can bring up the details in her skin in post-production. So okay, here's your control panel over here, which is where we do all the editing. So it's really easy. It just uses sliders. You just up and down, exposure up, exposure down, really easy. You just move them along. Contrast, highlights are your white areas, shadows, obviously the darker areas, and whites and blacks are similar. Clarity you probably won't want to use too much. That's kind of bringing in detail in the mid-tones. And vibrance and saturation can go a bit overboard on, so we tend to keep those a little bit lower, but that just brings back a little bit of colour back into your photos, because when you're shooting in RAW format, your RAW photo is just got no information in it at all. It's had no contrast adjustments or anything like that. The camera just gives you a completely raw photo, and that's why we need to do editing, so that we can turn it into something that can be, shot the way that you want it to and look the way that you want it to. So I generally start off with, for this image I'm going to start off with a contrast adjustment in my tone curve. So I put a little S-curve here. I like a little bit of contrast in my images. It's still quite dark down the bottom, which is fine. I'm going to bring her exposure up by using this radial filter. Click on that. I'm just going to reset the buttons. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit and bring up the shadows, and when I draw on this radial filter, you'll see it coming over the top of her. So at the moment I have the mask inverted, so it lightens her instead of the background. If it wasn't inverted, then it'd lighten the background, but I want it to lighten her. So that just goes over the top of her there, and I'll probably bring up the shadows a bit more. Probably a bit too much. So just fine tuning as you go. That looks okay. I also want to bring down the highlights over here, so that kind of just adjusts your sky a little bit, because that's the brightest part of the image, those highlights, and if you bring them down it just brings a bit more saturation back into the sky. The shadows, I think I'll just up them a little bit, because that will bring a little bit more detail into the grass. The whites I'll probably bring down a tiny bit, and the blacks, if you go down a lot, then your grass and everything will become a lot darker. I think I'll just leave the blacks where they are. Vibrance I usually bring up a little bit to bring a bit more colour back into the image, not too much. Vibrance is good to use instead of saturation, because saturation will affect the skin first. Vibrance will affect the skin last, so it'll affect everything else, your grasses and blues and things first. So I like to bring up the vibrance first. Sometimes if the image is looking even too saturated, then I'll even bring down the saturation a little bit just to tone it down a bit. But I want the saturation in this image because I really like those sky colours. So let's see. I also want to deepen this sky a lot more. So I'm going to put a graduated filter on. This is the graduated filter. So if we bring up the saturation heaps, we can see where we're drawing. I'm going to pull it down from the top. Okay, and bring this little button down. You can see as it comes down, when it went over her face, it made her face really, really orange. So I'm going to draw a bit of that off. We just bring it down to where we need it, down to about the horizon line, because I want that sky, if you have a look at the sky, getting nice and saturated there. And I can even bring down the exposure a little bit. Just depends how you want it to look. So that's way too saturated on her face. So I go up to the little brush and then I go over to erase, and I'm going to use my little brush and go like this and just erase that off her face. And we can see where that's affecting. This is called the mask overlay, and all that red area is where that graduated filter is affecting. So I don't really want it on her skin, make her skin look too crazy. I'll just brush it off her dress a little bit there too. Okay, so leave that there, and we'll click this little button and show you a before and after of where the filter went. So before, after, before, after. So you can see it just makes the sky a bit more saturated and lovely, because I really wanted to show off those colours. Where else? You can play with the hue, which is the colour of the tones. So if you get your little dropper here and you come over to the picture, you can grab any colour here. So I'm going to just click my mouse on his and go upwards, and it'll change the colour. Or if I go downwards, it'll change it back the other way. But I like the colours just as they are. I'm just going to reset that to normal. Sometimes my greens I change the colour because the greens can look really crazy. So I click on there and draw upwards. And I'll usually bring the saturation of the greens down because they just tend to be a bit out of control. Just makes a bit of a nicer green, not so much in your face. So right now, let's have a look at the before and after, what we're doing. So, okay, that's not going to show you actually. Go back to this. Create virtual copy. And reset that one. So we've got the before and the after. And this is the image that we're working on. And this is where I was kind of trying to get it to. So slightly different edit. Just depends how you're feeling at the time really. And I'm going to change that crop so that she's centered, because I don't like it that she's just slightly off course. And then lastly, do just a little bit of sharpening. So I'll bring it up. If you zoom in, this is with sharpening off, a little bit softer on the face, and then when I turn it on, sharpens a bit. I'm going to mask some of that sharpening out, and a little bit of noise reduction, just 5 on the luminance. Okay, so that's pretty much the end result. Let me know if you have any questions.